Before I introduce our distinguished speaker today, I want to give heartfelt thanks to Professor Kara Keeling here in the front row, who is Chair of Cinema and Media Studies and Professor of American Studies and Ethnicity. We truly would not have been able to do this without you. So thank you so much. In addition to Andrew, Shash, and David, thank you so much for your support. This is such a wonderful space to be able to listen to what I know is going to be a brilliant talk. So thank you for all of you to make that happen. I also want to thank three people who are not here, Melanie Escobar, Monica Prado Garcia, and Ingrid Flem Soto, for all of the work that they do as part of the USC Dornsife Experimental Humanities Lab to make sure that this went off without a hitch. So my name is Erin Graf Zibin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm professor of Latin American and Iberian cultures and comparative literature and director of the USC Dornsife Experimental Humanities Lab. And I want to welcome you to our first event of the 24-25 academic year. The Experimental Humanities Lab is a hub for critics, theorists, and practitioners in the arts and humanities who seek to take intellectual and creative risks and move beyond disciplinary boundaries and genres, bringing together scholars whose research focuses upon experimental arts, as well as those who want to experiment with their own writing or creative practices. The lab facilitates imaginative, indisciplined work. Few thinkers today represent this mission better than today's guest speaker, Professor Michael Boyce Gillespie. Professor Gillespie, who received his PhD in cinema studies from New York University, has taught at CUNY Graduate Center, the New School, Princeton, Duke, and Ohio University before he returned in 2022, is that right?
Yes.
To NYU, where he is currently Associate Professor of Cinema Studies in the Martin Scorsese Department of Cinema Studies. His work focuses on Black visual and expressive culture, film theory, visual historiography, popular music, and contemporary art. Gillespie is a theorist and a teacher, an author and an editor, a curator and a convener. His original expansive thinking can be found on the pages of his books, articles, and special issues, in museums, galleries, and theaters, and especially around the tables of the tastiest restaurants in New York City. An avant-garde critic, Gillespie not only studies experimental film, he actively and playfully experiments with the forms of academic production that, when they remain mired in disciplinary conventions, often fail to harness and articulate the most urgent ideas of our time. I first came across Gillespie's work in his breathtaking 2016 book, Film Blackness, American Cinema and the Idea of Black Film, published by Duke University Press, perhaps one of the earliest and best examples of a style and method of criticism that is now gaining momentum. Theoretically rigorous and ethically and politically urgent, Film Blackness allows the aesthetic objects he studies to lead the way, rather than imposing or projecting conceptual categories or ideological desires upon them. He reads and writes with love, which you call what kind of love?
Agitated.
Agitated love for and commitment to the aesthetic object. But don't take my word for it. MacArthur Genius Award winner, critic, and poet Fred Moten says it far better than I could. And I'm just going to quote a few sentences from his blurb on the back of Film Blackness. To visualize Black cinema as it is and as it could be is an act of prophetic description where theorizing is next to socializing, where the visible and invisible converge. This long-awaited book is here and up ahead of us, waiting for the new ways of seeing. It anticipates and inspires, end of quote. Gillespie's writing has also appeared in Regeneration, Black Cinema 1898 to 1971, ASAP-J, Film Quarterly, Liquid Blackness, Journal of Popular Music Studies, as well as other journals and edited collections. He was the consulting producer for the Criterion Collection releases of Deep Cover, Shaft, and Dry Long So, Pleasure, and the Art of Blackness. He is co-editor of Black One Shot, an art criticism series on ASAP-J that, quote, disputes staid frameworks of interpretation that cannot or will not account for the speculative ambivalent, and irreconcilable ways of Black forms. It speaks to the ongoing case for Black lives and art mattering. And it conjures up the necessary intimacy generated between a critic and their object, end of quote. Gillespie is currently working on a monograph entitled Dreams and False Alarms, Ambivalence, Pleasure, and the Art of Blackness. Today's talk, The First Time I Laughed After September 11th, the date is just a pure coincidence, Sonic Blackness and the Idea of Post-9/11 America, considers the sonic dimensions of the art of Blackness. Please join me in welcoming Professor Gillespie.
Thank you, Aaron, for the invitation, the introduction, the checks in the mail. I also want to thank all the various organizations here at USC that contributed to my very elaborate rider that I had in place that made this trip possible. So thank you to everyone. And very special thanks to Melanie for arranging my trip. So yes, it's September 12th, and I'm giving a talk on September 11th. Lots of feelings on that, and I think I will cover the vast majority of them over the course of this talk. I want to begin with two things. The first is the funniest thing I've ever heard that Toni Morrison said. I was not lucky enough to be in attendance at one of Toni Morrison's infamous holiday parties, but a friend of mine was, and he spoke of one night at one of Miss Morrison's holiday parties where she looked at the group of folks that were there gathered on the couch with her, and she asked, "Do you know what two books will be in George W. Bush's presidential library?" Now, when I heard this account, my first thought was, well, of course the Bible will be there. The Holy Bible will definitely. If there are only two books in Baby Bush's presidential library, you know damn straight the first one will be the Holy Bible. And many of the guests apparently did guess that it would be the Holy Bible. No one could guess what the second book was. And Toni Morrison paused and she looked at them and said, it would probably be the children's book he was holding when he heard that the first tower was hit. Yes, you can laugh. The second thing I want to start with has much to do with, I think, the spirit of what I'd like to think about out loud in terms of understanding how we access our own understanding of September 11th. How our understanding of September 11th in many ways can strike us in unfamiliar ways. What I'd like to show you right now is a deleted scene from Spike Lee's 1989 film, Do the Right Thing. Can you dim the lights, please?
Party coming up.
Hey, I'm at the party. There's a
And that party coming up Friday, I ain't going there with that old dance. I'm
Forget
sorry.
the butt. The butt is dead. We got a new dance.
We
man.
just need a
Hey,
new
hey,
one.
new dance. I'm telling you, I think Fred Sanford today. Let's do that one. I said, what are you laughing, man? Okay, do it, man. Just do it. Let's do it. Grab the top. Take that shit out. Isn't that nothing?
That's the tie.
Oh, man. Oh.
What,
Hey, Ella, I'm telling you. Ella, don't be calling my dance retarded.
Man, you retarded.
What, you got a dance?
Man, look at this shit. Look, it's called the slip and slide. Look.
Man,
Bring that shit
Ella,
up.
everybody can't do that shit.
Oh, man, you
Wait. I can't do that shit. What is
Bring
it?
your heel up like that, man. Come
What
on.
is that's not gonna work.
Act like a sissy.
Now you're gonna get ice.
What you gonna do?
Hey, what you gonna do, Park? We're gonna do the wiggle, the wiggle. I'm telling you, you be dancing, she go, oh, wiggle, 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 wiggle. Oh, wiggle. Shit, I ain't doing that shit, man. Just do it, man. Wiggle, do it. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Oh, wiggle, wiggle.
That's stupid as shit.
Man, you crazy. I think with my own dance. I do my own dance. You do yours, I do mine.
But that's-
Wiggle, 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 wiggle. September 11th arrives in places that often surprises us. So, anchored between devotion and a generative ambivalence, I remain primarily divested from empathetic readings of the art of Blackness to simply solicit feelings or diagnostically offer answers. I remain expansively committed to the study of Black visual and expressive culture. This is work with an investment in the multi-discursive, the polyvalent, and the speculative, not the deadening rhetoric of monolithic conceptions of Blackness. This is my critical disobedience, a desire to not perform readings that act as autopsies. In other words, I'm not trying to kill the object for the sake of a grand statement about art or life. With my current project, I'm considering what I am framing as a series of conceptual circuits, a series of occurrences, tropes, and incitements, whereby I am deliberately mapping what I see as the formal cultural, political, and historiographic consequence of the art of Blackness. This book project is entitled Dreams and False Alarms, Ambivalence, Pleasure, and the Art of Blackness. Listen. I'm not entirely convinced that I want the title of this book to be a Joni Mitchell lyric, but I am convinced that I will probably finish this book with that lyric in mind at every step. I am mapping and tracking evolutions, disputes, and concentrations. These circuits include the afterlives of Tennessee Williams' Desire and the Black Masseur, Ghost Dog and Hip-Hop Modernism, contemporary Black experimental cinemas, revenant materiality in the lawn jockey, the Black choreographics of Anna Rose Homer's The Fits, a speculative historiography of Winslow Homer's The Gulf Stream, and part of what I'll be presenting today, notions of post-9/11 music. The talk is an attempt to articulate the rhizomatic nature of my object love, my allegiance to these circuits that is not strictly about essences, but closer to improper burials, or perhaps the spectrality of ideas. Yes, I am afraid of ghosts, but my writing has taken the form in many ways of a self-burial, a self-entombing. Much love to Maggie Nelson and Julietta Singh for showing away, but really I'm probably in year 5 of recovery after reading Aisha Sabatini Sloan's essay, A Clear Presence, in her Dreaming of Ramadi in Detroit. In this essay, she enacts the exquisite holding of a concurrence between David Hockney's swimming pool paintings and the life of Rodney King. I am mapping out a tropological sketch that tracks evolutions, disputes, and concentrations. And yet, where did this 9/11 project begin? Well, it began here. Oh, I forgot to actually give you my sexy slide. There we go. Shout out to my friend Michael. This is last night at the Jane's Addiction concert in New York that we were supposed to go to together, but I decided it was a good idea to fly in 9/11 to get here. But let us begin here. Part 1, Daddy Had Dreams.
Wow, that trips me. My father always promised me that we would live in France. You know you don't believe that. We'd go boating on the Seine, and I would learn to dance. We lived in Ohio then, and he worked in the mines. I don't want to sing this song. It's not me. My father always promised me that we would be free, but he did not promise me that we would live in France. But I do take you away again.
How about Brooklyn?
No, my father knew nothing about New York at all. He promised me that we would live in peace. And that maybe I can still get. Okay, we have to skip that one.
Okay. Can I get the lights, please? Thank you. Oh, appreciate it much. All right. Nina Simone's first recorded attempt to cover Judy Collins' 1968 hit, My Father, is dated February 1971. It resembles a failed take or perhaps a warm-up or rehearsal. Listed as My Father/dialogue, the recording was improperly logged and subsequently lost. That is, lost until it was one of 4 songs discovered in the RCA vaults during the preparation of a greatest hits package devoted to her tenure on the label. The recording was eventually released in 1998 on the very best of Nina Simone, Sugar in My Bowl, 1967 to 1972. Nina Simone's RCA recordings exhibit the continued shifting of her star persona throughout the 1960s from concert pianist to civil rights singer and beyond. Unbothered by musical categories of any other term or any other terms of confinement, her work on the label featured more inclusion of soul, blues, and pop in her repertoire. During this period, Simone was formulating what I think of as a Black liberation pop songbook. The February 1971 date of the My Father recording session means that the song was recorded during the production of Simone's Here Comes the Sun. Produced and arranged by Harold Wheeler, the album of covers was recorded during the same time as My Father and released later that summer. Simone had been performing My Father in concert during this time and would remain a part of her live catalog throughout the rest of her career. Now forgive me, I'm not going to insult you and try and sing this, so I will read some Judy Collins lyrics right now. My father always promised me that we would live in France, we'd go boating on the Seine, and I would learn to dance. We lived in Ohio then, he worked in the mines. On his dreams like boats, we knew we would sail in time. A paternal tribute, Collins' song features a woman musing on her blue-collar beginnings in Ohio. Once somebody's daughter, the youngest sister and the last to leave home, the narrator thinks of her past life while now looking over the Parisian cityscape. The coal miner's daughter remembers the promises made and dreams imparted by her father of better days to come. A little over a minute and a half, the recording of Simone's cover opens with her solo at the piano and chatting with others in the studio. The echoed starkness of the production amplifies her enunciation of the song's opening verses. Unlike the soprano intoning by Collins, Simone offers a grounded contralto in the place of soaring airiness. Settled into the melody, Simone delivers the first verse with an additional quip as an aside. You know you don't believe that. The direct address to you targets the listener. Cheeky and seditious, the undercutting of the paternal pledge signals Simone's infidelity to, and ultimately her disinterest in the cover song shenanigans of simply inhabiting the place of the original. If a cover bears the expectation of a repetition accented by a nuance, then Simone falls short of this objective. When she ultimately says to skip that one, the song becomes that which shall not be named. She stops herself and completes an unraveling of the song's conceit. Dismissed as too precious a fantasy for her, she casts it aside as impossible and breaks the hold of the fantasy necessary for the song. Let us be clear, she's not hating on the song. She's hating a world that limits access to the possibility of experiencing and identifying with this song. With the halting of her performance, she renders the world of My Father strange and uncanny. Simone unequivocally demonstrates a difference surrounding the sentiment of nostalgia and paternal wishes. While Collins speaks to the dreams of our fathers, Simone steals away from the song's intentional cast to speak of dreams deferred. She proffers profane rejection in the place of sacred submission to the Judy Collins original. Importantly, Simone's acts of sonic dissent can never be limited to her catalog of protest songs alone. Her record of cover songs consistently entailed a covert transgression of genre and form, or what Daphne Brooks crucially notes as, quote, a kind of performative sit-in, end quote. Never just an attempt to mimic the feelings or fortune of another, Simone's cover tendencies assign new values by restipulating the terms of the popular. Simone's attempt to recast the song becomes mediated by her specificity, her contextual imbuing of another history and memory. In other words, her blackness. While she doesn't want to sing the song, "It's Not Me," she nevertheless performs a desire. He promised me that we would live in peace, and that maybe I'll still get. While maybe attests to reserved anticipation, the terms of peace are conditionally tied to her father's hopes, and also to a negative logic, something only recognizable as a coveted difference from the current state of things. Her daddy may never have spoken of France, but many expatriates, including Simone herself, explored it as an option. An exacting and exquisite read, Simone's black performative dissent enacts a crucial and hostile witnessing. She does not simply lure the listener to feel and process a familiar melody, lyric, and rhythm newly minted by another's tongue. Her counterpose demonstrates an unwillingness to be convincing. Her black disobedience intones a double-voicedness of a me and not me. I am still not free. With Nina Simone, I always hear "fuck you," and Claudia Rankine's disquieting thoughts on starvation living through anti-blackness when she writes, quote, appetite won't attach you to anything no matter how depleted you feel, end quote. Undone by wanting on a steady diet of nothing, a performer chooses to stop. Nina Simone's first recorded attempt to cover Judy Collins' 1968 hit My Father is dated February 1971. It resembles a failed take, or perhaps a warm-up or rehearsal. Though she does not fail, she refuses. I am quickly discovering I do not have a slide. So let's stay with Nina for a second. We're moving on to part 2, which is called 7 Curses. September 11th, 2001. I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing right now. The day that Bob Dylan's Love and Theft was released. As Greg Tate's review of the album that ran in the Village Voice 2 days later made plain, this day was more than just another occasion to reflect on the latest offering of that wild Mercury sound. Tate deciphers Love and Theft as an accumulation of American history, a premonition, a liturgy, and an act of sonic deliverance. Quote, whenever he's speaking as Dylan, the martyred lover, or as some kind of Jesus, the message appears abundantly clear. These may be the last days, but not even Armageddon is going to save us from growing up and our learning curve remains steep, end quote. With this cheeky and brutal assessment, Greg Tate's reading is embedded in the horrific historicity of 9/11, while also attuned to the idea of America and its wicked ironies. Quote, 4 jetliners, 19 allegedly surly Middle Eastern passport-carrying motherfuckers with knives and box cutters breeze past security when your lone black ass can barely make it through with house keys and pocket change. Where was racial profiling when we really needed it? None but the truly twisted will find even grim solace in that observation. If there's a hell below, we're all gonna go. Curtis Mayfield croons from the wings, end quote. Tate's capacious listening signals, among other things, an impending shift in popular music criticism wrought by the idea of post 9/11 music. And for me personally, of course, it was around this time of thinking about of hearing that Nina Simone track when it was finally released, that I began to think about questions of black refusal, or performative refusal, in this sense of on the level of the sonic. So to concentrate on the idea of post 9/11 music might mean addressing the poignantly deficient ways that music was staged in the service of post 9/11 rhetoric and conceptions of the terrorist attacks in the terms of inalienable rights, wounded sovereignty, and American exceptionalism. The post-qualifier engendered a rethinking of music, a rethinking attuned to the auditory tension between a tacit nostalgia for the time before that sunny Tuesday and music's general affective capacity to memorialize and mark. Rebe Garofalo identifies the key historical features of post-9/11 popular music as including benefit and tribute concerts and recordings, the rise of country music as advocate of the new era of post-9/11 jingoism, and the way that popular musicians and genres attempted to exercise their art and dissent while navigating the containment measures of industrial and political interests. In the midst of this pervasive sense that unity trumps self-reflection, a pair of performances at the Prayer for America service offer a significant opportunity to appreciate the ways that music registered dissent. Perfect. Yeah, thank you. A pair of performances at the Prayer for America service offer a significant opportunity to appreciate the ways that music registered dissent and refusal in spite of its presumed nationalist utility. My talk at this point is building upon the Nina Simone and shifting to another measure of refusal as a meditation on the sonic and historical consciousness. What was a prayer for America? Hosted by Oprah Winfrey, the multicultural and multi-faith Prayer for America was held at Yankee Stadium on September 23, 2001, to honor the families of the first responders from the New York City Police Department's Fire Department and Port Authority who died at the World Trade Center on September 11th. The event featured community, political, and entertainment luminaries with a resultant songbook for the event that intoned the multi-accentual and space-making tendencies of what Josh Kuhn has called an audiotopia, his amendment of the Foucauldian heterotopia with attention to how music effectively engenders social spaces. This proposition of an audiotopia as a sonic space of irresolute contradictions and conflicts puts the distillation fantasy of singular and assured harmonies on pause. This sense of an audiotopia can account for the richly jagged ways that this event produced some rather discordant revelations. The force of difference present in Yankee Stadium on that day could not be interred or exclusively directed by patriotic persuasion. The failure on that day was necessary and abundant. In his opening remarks that day, James Earl Jones, rest in peace, declared, quote, "To people around the world, our nation is a symbol of unity, a symbol of liberty, equal opportunity, democracy, and diversity. This attack was an attempt to undermine these four pillars of our civic faith," end quote. This civic faith proposition was fundamentally steeped in a utopian ideal of America and its newly branded post-9/11 citizenry. With its enactment of a civil whole, A Prayer for America was consequentially scored by a curious assortment of songs. The prelude to the ceremony included the NYPD's Pipes and Drums of the Emerald Society, performing a medley, and I want you all to think about it. What songs would you want to hear at this event? Well, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. So the pipes and drums of the Emerald Society performed a melody that included the Star Spangled Banner, Battle Hymn of the Republic, Amazing Grace, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Your Grand Old Flag, Over There, Give My Regards to Broadway, and Auld Lang Syne. The songbook for the service also included performances by Ronan Tynan of God Bless America, Placido Domingo's Ave Maria, Lee Greenwood doing God Bless the USA, Mark Anthony doing America the Beautiful, and Bette Midler performing. What do you think Bette Midler performed? Come on, people. Wind Beneath My Sails. Or Wind Beneath My Wings, sorry. Crossing over to some Christopher Cross shit right there, sorry. So the Civic Citizenship mixtape for the event details a wide swath of martial music flourishes, Broadway classics, banal sloganeering, and love songs. In total, these ever-familiar songs were meant to rally patriotic identifications with the cause of American perseverance. We're all in this together, right? Following an address by Engelbert Singh from the Sikh Temple of Richmond Hills, Oprah Winfrey introduced the Boys and Girls Choir of Harlem.
And now let's hear from a great group of young people from right here in New York City, the Boys and Girls Choir of Harlem.
Okay. So the Boys Choir of Harlem was founded by Dr. Walter Turnbull in 1968 as a performance group, but with a pedagogical mission to provide academic training for young Black inner-city children. The combined choirs sang Lift Every Voice and Sing, the song which began as a poem by James Weldon Johnson that debuted in 1900, and that would be later set to music by Johnson's brother, J. Rosamond Johnson, as a song eventually dubbed the Negro National Anthem. It would later be adopted as the official song of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. The NAACP promoted the song as an anthem for Black freedom struggle, the long emancipation. Moreover, the use of the song during the Civil Rights Movement and its eventual retitling as the Black National Anthem continued the purposing of the song as a Black anthem. As Shauna Redman astutely argues, quote, Black anthems become incubators not only for a race sound fusion, but also the merger of art and practice. The conditions that give rise to these anthems within the diaspora include colonialism, Jim Crow segregation, and myriad legal and extra-legal enactments of persistence in inequality. Therefore, liberation and its pursuit are necessarily narrated and exercised in tandem with philosophies and acts of resistance, end quote. Thus, the place of the Black anthem in this public ceremony of mourning, memorialization, and rallying enacts a distinct historiography, one far removed from universal. The song operates as the writing of a history with a very precise attention to struggle and the white supremacist core values of America. With Barry Schenk's work in mind, the song might lack an explicit reference to an individual hero or location, but its enacted pledge to God's will that his subjects stay on the path of righteousness links the song to the Black public sphere of the Black church and informs its status as anthem. The performance of Lift Every Voice and Sing at the ceremony diffuses its pledge to march on till victory is won. In the stadium, the Black anthem signaled a powerful misequivalence with the event's mandate of the universal mending of a wounded nation. As a song of Black history, interpretation, narrativity, and collectivity, the staging of Lift Every Voice and Sing in the ceremony introduced resolute terms of remembrance that predate 9/11. This issue was further compounded by a more egregious summoning of Civil Rights America with the next song performed, the song Martin Luther King Jr. called the Battle Hymn of the Movement. That was a very hard edit. So, what would you perform after Lift Every Voice and Sang at a 9/11 memorial? Well, you would skip accidentally to the next slide. Let's try that again. Let's go here. All right. Yeah, Rudy's making me ill, so I'll stop there. And just to be clear, I mean, I think Walter Turnbull is being very deliberate in his song choices, and so my critique is the ways in which the devisers of the ceremony, when they were commissioning particular performances, that they immediately read this as, oh yeah, this will be totally appropriate, and not really understanding that there is a very rich kind of signifying that's going on with the choices that the musical director made. Okay, so inspired by a New Testament verse from Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, the lyrics and melody evolved over time, but We Shall Overcome was initially adapted from Charles Tinley's 1900 gospel song, I'll Overcome Someday. Can I get a little light, please? Thank you. And I wish I knew how to do this so you could just sit down, but okay. It's fine. So it was initially adapted from Charles Tidley's 1900 gospel song, I'll Overcome Someday. It was first sung in its present form during a strike by the Negro Food and Tobacco Union in Charleston, South Carolina in 1945. In the 1960s, it would become synonymous with the civil rights movement and activist struggle, as the song became a vital part of the liberation musicology that aided in imparting the cultural politics of the civil rights movement. In this way, the song became a tool for organizing collectivity. Staging of We Shall Overcome in Tiananmen Square or at the fall of the Berlin Wall or even Hurricane Sandy benefits were transliterative acts of cultural and historical refabulation. This means that while We Shall Overcome might be known as a song of the civil rights movement, its staging in other spatio-temporal and cultural contexts has always occurred with an equivalent sense of liberation struggle in the face of great odds, be they totalitarian, ecological, or otherwise. The song's deployment in the context of a prayer for America provoked a particular lenticular texturing of historiographies. This moment echoed the NAACP campaign of the 1940s to inspire African Americans to enlist in the Army during the Double V campaign's mantra of victory abroad and victory at home. In the stadium, the song produced a fissure or tenuous stutter in the event's nation-building scheme. And yes, indeed, it was the first time I laughed in those 12 days that followed September 11th. Thus, the choral invocation of Civil Rights America remediated the event and intermittently recast Rudy Giuliani, not as the wannabe reincarnation of Winston Churchill, but instead as a colored man trying to register to vote in 1950s Alabama. Furthermore, Al-Qaeda became Klansmen, and Osama bin Laden, a distant cousin, if not a love child, of George Wallace and Bull Connor. Jihad now, jihad tomorrow, jihad forever. The purposing of the song for 9/11 memorialization revealed unresolved domestic terror affairs as much as it was now expected to speak of international terrorism to a newly formed colorblind kin. I mean, after all, Emmett Till was not killed by a drone strike. Yet noting the historical continuum and accumulations that inform the war on terror creed to come, Erica Edwards crucially notes that, quote, the official war on terror, which escalated after the September 11th attacks of 2001, accelerated and heightened the import of imperial discourses of race and gender in the contemporary United States. Against the threat of a foreign enemy, public culture emphasized national unity across divisions of race, gender, and religion. While public discourses after the September 11th terrorist attacks emphasized racial unity, increased surveillance linked the threat of Islamic terrorism to a history of domestic counter-terrorism that had been aimed at containing Black activism. As scholars of race after 9/11 argue, the war on terror exported the technologies of surveillance and punishment historically aimed at Black people, while importing the racialized figure of the Muslim enemy, end quote. Edwards keenly identifies the confluences of American empire that were very much present at the Prayer for America. Terror has long been visited on this land and its people, well before the airline hijackings. Terror has been visited on this land and its people long before flight was ever dreamed possible. The dissonance and difference between these two performances at the event could not be soothed away by the ecumenical call to fellowship. Beyond the visual legibility of Blackness by way of the performers themselves, the sonic Blackness of the music was not subsumed by the murmurs of a reprioritizing of the role difference would take in the emergent post-9/11 socio-political landscape. This also means that the creation of a we of that moment in Yankee Stadium must have included Abner Louima, Amadou Diallo, Patrick Dorismond, and many others who were stopped, frisked, profiled, wounded, and expired by terror, right? The performance of Lift Every Voice and Sing and We Shall Overcome disclosed that the national marshaling towards the impending war on terror had a precedent freedom crisis of anti-Blackness. The post-racial disassociative fantasy of whiteness necessary for these songs to manageably function in this post-9/11 context generatively failed. Their patriotic unity, their instrumentalizing as an anthem for all Americans, could not nullify their provenance and distinct measure of hope. The Blackness of these songs, their deeply contextual difference and historical resonance, cannot be simply adapted, erased, obscured, or wholly overcome. We're moving into the third part. That would be great.
They've been warning them it was going to happen for years now, and it's happened.
Saying we heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people were jumping out the windows.
At first, you thought it was pieces of the building falling, until they realized that they had arms and legs.
We used to call it Mama's building. I told him that it had been hit by an airplane and had now been destroyed, and it doesn't exist anymore. He's, I think, concerned because he sees how sad I am. He kind of sees the sadness.
There's a major fire at the Pentagon. The full 6-story height of the Pentagon is gone.
I don't think anybody is safe. I think everybody in this country right now is at risk of getting hurt.
You don't know what building's going next, or where the next plane is going to fall. Could be on your neighborhood or one of your family members' neighborhoods or something.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable the state that the world is in today. That they have to get into a situation to where they have to kill to be noticed.
I just don't understand, and you just wonder what else is to come of this.
We cannot let these attacks succeed. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
I don't think the way of faithful people, whether they be Christians, whether they be Jews, whether they be Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, or any of the great world religions, I don't think any of those religions would call for an act of retaliation. I think we are people who are of one mind in seeking peace because of the call to unity in a God who essentially is a God of love. They've been wondering what's going to happen for years now. And it's happened.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. The state of the world is today. To get into a situation to where they have to kill to be noticed.
I just don't understand where he's
Can I get the
going
lights?
to come.
And you can just fade it out completely.
You don't know where he's going next.
All right. I wish I could have played all of it for you. It's about 13 minutes long. But in terms of the chapter that I'm writing, I moved from the Nina Simone to the Prayer for America to an analysis of what was the first. I think I played you probably the first 4 minutes of this song. So, a sonic and affective mapping organized by audio samples of the voice of the people accounts from September 11th and the days that followed is where it begins. The World Trade Center, the Pentagon, news reports, baby bush prattling, and the Doppler divisioning and chopping up of alarms and sirens that melodiously signal a community in a state of disharmony. This is the detailing of a phonography, a sound writing, a sonic historiography. I am deeply invested in examining this act of Black expressivity and performative refusal that centers on September 11th. Just over 13 minutes in length, this is Theo Parrish's Major Moments of Instant Insanity, which was initially a vinyl-only release that first began appearing in record stores approximately a month after September 11th as a 12-inch with a handwritten black Sharpie title of merely Theo, Instant Insanity. The song would not be available digitally until only a few years ago. I think I ended up getting in touch with a record store in Denmark in order to get a copy of it. Because whenever it would appear in record stores here in the States, it would basically be gone as soon as it entered the store. My reading of this song, my object love, insists on its permanence as its permanence in the sense that it is always a song about pause and suspension and divestment from the shock and awe that came in the months following September 11th. In this way, my reading of the song is to read it as a stay and a refusal of an accelerated narrative arc that ran across chapters of America Attacked, America Mourns, America Attacks. I appreciate this song not as a rallying call or anthem, but as an eternal opportunity to shut the hell up and grieve and not process, yet eventually process. Who knows? I can't tell you how to dance, and I've certainly got love for the wallflowers. But I appreciate this song as demonstrating the potentiality of an unfulfilled promise of post-9/11 music, a deep listening in 5 steps from denial to acceptance. Yes, indeed, a major moment of instant insanity. An accretive concurrence, testimonies, field recordings, a soundscaping. Theo Parrish directly accessed his television while watching reports in the days that followed 9/11. He lived in Cleveland at the time. I won't get into this, but one of the things that he did say was that he was trying to make it work with his then girlfriend. It didn't work, but at least that time and out of that time in Cleveland, he was able to make this song. With the free jacking of the news cycle, the song tellingly opens as channel surfing, then marshals the counterpoints, accents, and textures of an event. The opening discloses the song's exercise as a kind of transduction of 9/11. Operating as a circuit, the song condenses the magnitude of the event with an organizational logic devoted to what Kathy Carruth identifies as the resonance of trauma as, quote, the force of an experience not yet owned, end quote. The song's indexing essayism occurs as sound sculpture, and sound sculpture is the term that Theo Parrish has always used for his practice and is also the name of his record company, still based in Detroit. The DJ methodology manifested through the MPC interface and its algorithmic devising is a rhythm making and sequencing of velocities. The song commences with a polyphonic overmodulation fury of what will eventually operate as its choral collective. This prelude stirs as a concentrated assemblage of, indeed, sound signatures. The compiling and emplotment of the compositional elements are textured by the song's Detroit techno conceit of a bass line coupled with the synthesizer's rise and fall cues, an embeddedness and observation. Instant Insanity maneuvers with the temporal swagger of Detroit techno, but more precisely the oscillating bass and keyboard patterning is the constant forge of beatdown, a slower and deeper form of techno, of Detroit techno. As Guy McCreary, founder of Third Ear Records, commented, quote, it was Eddie Fowlkes whom I first heard use the word beatdown after I had raved about this Norv Talley track. To me, it was techno, but it was slower than any techno I'd ever heard. It was just deep music, and Eddie called it beatdown. When I asked him for the description of beatdown, all I could say was beat down, down tempo, end quote. Historiographies of Detroit techno often include considerations of the aesthetic seriousness that Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, known as the Belleville Three, brought to bear on their black middle class and Europhile tastes for the synthesizer drum machine and the enduring impact of Kraftwerk's music. Now, Belleville is about 30 miles southwest of Detroit and about 20 miles southeast of Ann Arbor and is set on the shore of Belleville Lake. Regardless, it is in this aesthetic palette of the Belleville Three and others that define the Detroit techno as a futurist practice that suspends the premature autopsies and condescension of ruin porn that Detroit is subjected to this very day. What of Theo Parrish? He is a part of what could be thought of as a third wave of Detroit techno. He is roughly historicized in many cases as following the second generation, which includes figures such as Detroit Resistance, Drexcia, and Carl Craig. Theo Parrish was born in Chicago in 1972 after graduating from the Academy of Arts in Chicago. He received a scholarship to the Kansas City Art Institute, where his interest in music was taken to a new level through his study of sculpture. His concentration is what he called sound sculpture. Quote, if someone asked me what I got a thesis in, it was sound sculpture. I didn't graduate from the sculpture department. I didn't graduate from the video department. It was in between, and when you're in between, you have to get your own concepts. I'm particularly interested in how, with this celebration, tacit celebration of James Sneed's own work on repetition, that is in this encounter of repetition, that we find an ever-accruing newness, an ever-accruing possibility, which is held and suspended in its place of, again, a generative kind of grieving. Panic is spreading, hang-ups, letdowns, bad breaks, setbacks. Inner City Blues, Make Me Wanna Holler, almost functions as Instant Insanity's enfolded refrain, its recurrent limit, its summation. But the song as a whole is not just a re-edit or recontextualization of Inner City Blues. It is the voice, the voice, the voice, Saint Gay, Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye in his incitement, with his incitement as a revenant soul man. He proceeds with the melanchalizing force of Kerner Report's Soul. He proceeds with the spectropoetics of The Ghost in the Machine and Anachrony. It's interesting to think about how What's Going On, the 1971 masterpiece album that closes with Inner City Blues Makes Me Wanna Holler, is an album that arrived late but on time, an introspectively 1960s album that was released in the early 1970s. Black to the Future, What's Going On is perhaps a late album that always arrives right on time and damn near 3 steps ahead. Gaye is always hailing, always activating the present in which his voice is evoked. And to demonstrate that, I want to show you a short video I made. So this is Marvin Gaye performing the national anthem at the NBA All-Star Game in 1982, coupled with the incredible sequence from Spike Lee's 25th Hour. Whoops. I think we need the volume too.
Bright star through the perilous fight, oh Lord, oh the fight, oh the ramparts we run, go so gallantly, yeah. And the rockets red flare, the bombs bursting in air, came through the night, that flag was still there. Won't say does by the star spangled banner yet wave for the land for the free and the heart of God.
All right. Always late, but always on time, such is the way of Saint Gay. I'm running a little long, so I'm going to be cutting ahead here on the fly, but one of the solemnly stoned and flushed with the sanctified, Gay's voice seized with historiography, political fabulation, and a deeply passionate and paced accounting of society in crisis. His blackness, his voice, which crucially moves across what Mark Anthony Neal has identified as the falsetto, the gospel shout, and the smooth mid-range, and demonstrates the ways in which Marvin Gaye is always already a choir. I'm a black star, bright star, bright star, bright star. So, this is the rub of an adjacency and contiguity. This is the potentiality of an incredibly generative collaboration. This is the story of how Detroit techno comes to the rescue of New York City, comes to the rescue of a city in a state of crisis. My talk for today has been very much about documenting the ways that I've grown to listen or grew to understand September 11th. Not in the sense of having any definitive answers or being at peace with that day, but more precisely the ways in which I've grown to listen and understand to listen for things that often aren't available on the lyric sheet. As I began with the Toni Morrison joke, I began in that place because I want to talk about the ways that music can insist on a kind of enacted intimacy in the key of anguish suspension and poignant meditation. I do these things not from a hateful place and not from a comic place, but truly from an ambivalent place, to simply let the objects speak for themselves. This might be a way of thinking about sonic visuality, or a way that we can insist that the sonic can direct our comprehension of the visual, something in the way we might understand how music matters for the worlds in which we survive and thrive, and fuck it, we might even dance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for a few questions, comments, reflections. It's a lot to take in.
I know it's a lot to take in, and I had to cut out a whole part.
Over lunch, you were telling us that you learned as a graduate student that you didn't have to actually say everything.
You didn't have to say everything, but then there's also, they just became objects that began to resonate even more with me as I began to think about post 9/11 music. I will go in and say that the part that I cut out focuses on the closing credit sequence of Lars von Trier's Manderley. And in that in that credit sequence, it is brilliantly smug Lars von Trier giving a history of America with attention to anti-Blackness and white supremacy. So it is a greatest hits of horrific visuals. And of course, the irony and the cheekiness of Lars von Trier is that he uses David Bowie's Young Americans. And that's supposed to be really, like, fuck you Americans, isn't this funny? And I love Manderley, but I find that the closing sequence fails. And it fails because Lars von Trier only listens to the refrain of Young Americans, and he actually doesn't listen to the lyrics of the song. And so the actual book chapter ends with thinking about how actually within David Bowie's Young Americans, there's intimations of a kind of cross-racial solidarity and love that kind of dovetails with that goes against Lars von Trier's commentary of post 9/11 America. But yeah, I'd love to end on the Bowie, but shit, we've gone long enough. So eventually the book will cover all of this.
Well,
And-
I know that I have a lot of questions.
All right, and I do have to correct myself. I said that Sound Signature was the name of Theo Parrish's company. Or Sound Sculpture. It's really Sound Signature. Sound Sculpture is how he has defined his practice, but the company is Sound Signatures. Yeah.
There were a lot of really powerful and even quite poignant moments in your talk. I was particularly struck by the pivot from the kind of scene of kind of national unity and grieving to Theo's piece. And part of what interested me about that, I think, speaks to what's so compelling about your work more generally, which is to say, I think you point very intelligently to the way in which kind of narrativization of an event, in this case around unity, et cetera, is actually sort of an enactment of violence, whereas a work of sound, a sound piece that kind of revolves around I just don't understand, and sort of the impossibility of understanding, the impossibility of narrativization, that's where there's sort of this intervention that really kind of bears witness to not just the violence of that particular instance of terror, but as you're
Yeah.
saying, this history of terror that doesn't begin there, and so therefore cannot end and be wrapped up and understood and narrativized through the lens of national unity.
Yeah. Oh, no, no, thank you so much for that. I think I was saying over lunch that at my core, I'm still a failed English major. I mean, getting a BA in English kind of taught me, was the beginning of how I learned to read. So textuality and narrativity is important to me. My investments have definitely changed in it. I was very struck by what was being offered to me, or offered to all of everyone here, all American citizens, as objects which could account for our feelings, or performances that were being offered that might account for what we were feeling. And yet, especially in the days that followed, feeling a kind of refusal to allow people to grieve. A comparable thing would be to think about, when the fuck are we going to grieve over the pandemic? In a way that we just have not. It was almost as though the pandemic was just like a kind of fucking inconvenience. Of like, oh, the trains weren't running today. Oh, the trains are running, so now everything is fine. And it's like, I know that I will never, even the way that I think about my work, or think about what I prioritize about how I want to move through the world, I'm not going to be returning to pre-pandemic levels. So it's this insistence that to grieve is in some ways unproductive or an inconvenience. That I like that I'm drawn to this work which insists on the pause, that insists that we sit, and that there is no accelerated timetable of how long we need to process things. You know, when suddenly we were in Iraq after September 11th, I was kind of like, okay, this is what you think that is going to make me feel better? Or this is supposed to be an offering that suddenly we can turn the page? You know, I still refuse to go to where the World Trade Center was. That's a part of Manhattan that I'm never going to there again. And I know people that have to go there who insist on going. But you know, that part that, and I love New York will always be home, and I'm so happy to live there, but I'm never going to where the World Trade Center used to be. And that's a part of my process. And I want there to, I think, as I said before, I'm drawn to work that can make room for that. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you so much for delivering us such a wonderful presentation. I know that we had like multiple luring themes that were kind of like incorporated throughout the presentation, regardless of the forms and genres.
Yeah.
And at the very end, we talked about like, we used the quote from Susan Sontag, puts a lot of attention on like symbolic representations, metaphors, and these things.
Right.
And you were talking about the idea of historical memories. Do you think that like the different practices of art that we exercise on the daily are sort of this medium or mediator that help us compensate with these heavy loss that are experienced as a collective? Like, do you think that the type of art that you illustrated in your presentation, they're meant to be more so digestment of individual consumption of their personal reflection, or should it be treated as a collective process of like what you talked about, civic engagement, right? Like singing as a choir and then having that resemblance and that sense of like resonance within the group to overcome disparity and pain that are very inherently divisive, and those divisions can be argued as what brings us pain in the first place. Like, how do you view this like counteractive process of trying to fight something that already breathed in us and then actively pushing it out through something that's supposed to be an enjoyment.
Right. When is your book coming out? That's an outstanding question and prompt, and I really appreciate that. And there's no way I'm going to do justice to how consequentially you touched on so many things, but I will certainly try. I think that I don't think that we do that. There are ways in which when we position ourselves as part of a collective, that there is genuine strength and power and capacities of action that are necessary and important. But I do think that ultimately, when it comes to thinking of the place of art in the world and in our lives, that we would do ourselves, we need to be kinder to ourselves in the sense of allowing art to deny us certain things. I am more drawn to ambivalence and ambiguity. I am immediately suspicious of answers. I don't think of answers as an invitation. I actually think of answers as where someone is telling me to shut up. I like that the break of Nina Simone and that moment where, that she just can't do it anymore, and it's so abrupt, and it's hysterical, and it's necessary, and it's liberating, and and I don't need to necessarily psychoanalyze Nina Simone of what is the mental state of Nina Simone at this point. All I need to know is that a black woman is refused, and to appreciate and respect that and understanding how that refusal might help me to articulate my investment in certain objects that began to become more important to me after September 11. So I guess one way of a more immediate way of answering your question is that it's good to be afraid of certain art when it refuses to give you an answer. And to find that actually it's harder work, but that we need to sit with more ambiguous and ambivalent things rather than sit with things which give us an answer or claim to give us an answer all the time.
Sorry, Natalie, did you have a question?
I actually wanted to.
I did see her hand first.
No.
I was really fascinated with the excellent talk. I was actually interested in the sampling of Marvin Gaye's.
Yeah,
Make
yeah.
Me Wanna Holler.
Yeah.
And how you overlaid it on that single from Do the Right Thing. Could you talk more about the sampling?
Sure. I'm trying to remember. There was there was a guy who actually passed away. I think his name is Ben Bowman. He has a book called, which is a study of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On in the context of this last great Motown moment of Motown actually based in Detroit. And he spends a lot, and he actually does a rather exquisite read of, it's off now, but yeah, I think I showed it of Marvin Gaye standing next to the swing set, and it seems to be an abandoned space, and he does this great reading of this sign of abandonment is almost signaling the eventual abandonment of Detroit that Motown itself would commit itself to, right, by moving all of its offices to LA. I'm fascinated by the battles that Marvin Gaye had with Berry Gordy and Berry Gordy's general's refusal that Motown would be something for white teenagers, and therefore, in order for that crossover appeal to happen, that his refusal to have any kind of political content, right? And that Marvin Gaye had to really battle after making the single What's Going On to be able to make the entire album. And so it's also the point that I was making before about the irony that it's such that, you know, we listen to this album and we think of it immediately as that this is one of the most important albums of the 1960s, and it's not a 1960s album. It's an album that Marvin Gaye had to battle Berry Gordy over for so long that it didn't come out until the 70s, right? And so there's actually some kind of hokiness to some of the expressions and all of that are very 60s expressions that are spread across the whole album. So that's why, in terms of thinking of an album that's late and that's always on time, I just found that it just synchronized so well with this deleted scene from Do the Right Thing. And that was totally random. It was completely random of just thinking, even the way that I appreciate a film set in New York City post 9/11. You know, there were some film companies that digitally erased the towers, that they felt that it would be too traumatic for audiences to be able to see the World Trade Center in some of these films that came out within the year after September 11th, that they just digitally removed it. And for me, there are films, you know, like the two films that stupidly always come to mind are, you know, John Cassavetes' Gloria. I mean, those shots of Gina Rowlands and with the World Trade Center lingering around, and the Dino De Laurentiis production of King Kong, where King Kong is climbing up the World Trade Center with Jessica Lange in his arms. And it's stupid as hell, but it's like that will always be there. And there's no way that that can be erased. And maybe that might inform why I can never go there, because they're still there in my mind, you know? So yeah, it was totally random that the deleted scene and the Marvin Gaye came together. But the more I watched it, it just felt right, you know? And it's really only been something that I use for the sake of presentations, but I haven't really written on it. But I'm glad it resonated with you. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
Thank you so much for that talk. I'm really interested in the relationship between repetition and failure. And I'm talking about the deleted scene and then thinking about sort of the Nina Simone take, the failed take, it also arrives late in a sense that we don't know about it when the album is released, as far as I understand.
Yeah.
It's rediscovered later. I guess I'm really interested in the concept of both like popular film and music as being comped together by takes, but that there are these takes that we don't see, and that here we see that maybe a really important performative refusal is sort of obscured in the actual.
Right.
And then, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just curious about how we recover repetition and its possible like generativity in film and music. And I think maybe what you were doing with the Marvin Gaye and the repetition of the 25th hour scene, maybe it's like an attempt to recover something in repetition that gets lost. But I was just curious to hear.
It is you know, I remember the first time that I read James Snead's Repetition in Black Culture, and I was so keyed in with thinking about it in terms of literature. And then I began to think about this question of repetition in cinema, but what I had not, it began to mean more to me the more I watched Black experimental film. That's really when that particular James Snead work began to kind of key me in to understanding the consequence of that work. So James Snead, by way of my own viewings of Black experimental cinema, has generally expanded my conception of repetition, which I've then retroactively begun to apply to music. Now, I know that there's been a great deal of great scholarship on thinking of applying or utilizing James Snead's ideas on repetition towards thinking about hip hop. And I've appreciated that work, but I find that with techno, or this particular iteration of Detroit techno, that the idea of the repetitiousness is always a cycling and accruing of capacities of a difference to come works better than it does or it works better for me in terms of my understanding of what repetition in Black culture that work can do. I mean, I totally get it in terms of its applicability to hip hop, but with techno, and specifically Theo Parrish's work, it's really something that I sit more and more with. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers it. And it's really about learning, and there are things, we read things every day, and I think that we often put ourselves in the position where we understand everything that we read the first time that we read it, or the second time, or the third time. You know, I could go on and on with this, but the point is that I'm trying to do the work of revisiting, or not even revisiting, of keep reading. Because I'm never going to know everything about any particular work. But I can grow more at peace with what draws me to the work and understand the textures and the nature of what draws me to the work the more I return to it, rather than, you know, my kind of pissy graduate student ways, where I was like, oh, I got that, I understand that, I need this, I need that, and you know. But no, to actually sit with something, to be responsible for something. And it reminds me of my uncle, fantastic guy, Lucius Outlaw. He's an amazing Africana philosopher. Highly recommend everybody reads his work. He's been on an ongoing project of, he'll just reread the same Ralph Ellison essays for years on end. And I saw his dog-eared copy of Shadow and Act, and I was like, fuck. That's the work. That's the work. Dog-eared, posted, marked, so many post-its that it doesn't even look like a book anymore. But that we commit ourselves to the process of, this is my job. This is what drives me. That I need to keep reading and I need to keep listening, and not get panicked over a definitive answer. You know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, this room is being used for another event right now, and so we have been politely asked to end on time. So I would like to invite you to stand outside with us in the atrium if you have further questions for Professor Gillespie. And in the meantime, thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking Professor Gillespie.
Thank you.